One of the most common discussion points in the world of Ice and Fire, which has become an even bigger question with the start of House of the Dragon, is whether or not the Maesters of Westeros were conspiring against the Targaryens to destroy their dragons and undermine their rule of the Seven Kingdoms. And in one sense, the answer to this question is incredibly simple. Because yes, the Maesters were undoubtedly conspiring against the Targaryens to win back some of the power that they lost in Aegon's conquest, and likely push their strength as an institution even further than it had already been in years past. More broadly, the so-called Grand Maester conspiracy can likely include the Maesters intentionally undermining all magic and the people that used it, which is a far more interesting proposition given that the Maesters actually do have the opportunity to study magic. And we do see Maesters specifically seemingly try to prevent the use of magic in Westeros at certain points. And what makes that inquiry particularly intriguing is that it has more than one potential answer. Clearly, given that the Order of Maesters is meant to be an analog for the real-world early development of science and education, an obvious assumption would be that they don't like magic, as it's a very esoteric concept that doesn't naturally lend itself to study. And it seems to contradict many of the more hard sciences and subjects that the Maesters build their expertise in. But there is another obvious possibility. The existence of the Valyrian steel Maester chain link that connotes an education in the higher mysteries clearly implies that the Maesters fully acknowledge that magic exists. And although their numbers are few, some of them choose to learn whatever information the Maesters of the Citadel have gathered about it. So the question then becomes, were the Maesters conspiring to erase magic from the world, or were they simply trying to ensure that they had complete control over it? Although it could be coincidental and relatively minor, I do think that it's interesting that the higher mysteries education is represented by a Valyrian steel link. It might arguably be the best or only option, since Valyrian steel is a magical metal that has a recurring presence in the world of Planetos. And it's not that unusual to find Valyrian steel in Westeros either. However, to represent the magical studies with a steel that was created by a civilization that was built on and then completely decimated by magic seems like it could be a pointed reminder of what these higher mysteries are capable of. It's not beyond belief that the Maesters would consider magic to be an unstable and dangerous art, because in many ways it is. And therefore, they might want to snuff it out as much as possible in order to keep Westeros from being obliterated by it in the way that the Valyrian freehold was. But on the flip side, it's also not hard to believe that they might want to essentially make any magical power available in the world exclusive to themselves. Like most organizational institutions and powerful groups in Westeros, the Maesters of the Citadel are interested in expanding their already tremendous influence. Only the faith and the crown could probably be said to rival their authority. So mastering magical abilities while stifling them in others would be a very good strategy to put themselves at the top of the political food chain. If their intention was to erase as much magic from the world as possible, it seems like they did a pretty decent job, at least in a cultural sense. There are brief allusions to the fact that the Maesters may be aware of the existence and true power of magic. But on a broader scale, Westeros' belief in and use of magic has all but vanished by the time that A Song of Ice and Fire begins. And despite the fact that the Targaryens conquered the continent with dragons, their knowledge of how magic works or how they can use it seems to be nearly non-existent by the time they build themselves up in the Seven Kingdoms. There are some indications that certain houses in the kingdom still have some magical knowledge, but if they do, it is a highly guarded secret that most people in Westeros brush off as kooky occult obsession rather than anything legitimate, powerful, or dangerous. At least from a PR standpoint, if the Maesters were intentionally attempting to diminish the use of magic in Westeros, they did a spectacular job. Ergo, the fact that so many readers and viewers question whether or not the Maesters were behind the demise of the dragons makes sense. While the Targaryens have no idea how to wield their magical abilities by the time they invade the Seven Kingdoms, they reintroduced magic to the people of Westeros on a very broad scale, and they used that magic to conquer an entire continent. So there are plenty of reasons that the Maesters would see House Targaryen as their enemy, and would have a particular interest in destroying the dragons as a species. And obviously, It's a plausible theory not just because the Maesters would want to eliminate the threat and power of dragons. It's also because the dragons did actually go extinct as a species. Yes, the Dance of the Dragons was a massive contributing factor to their demise. But even aside from that, the dragons were getting smaller, feebler, and harder to breed for quite a while prior. So it clearly begs the question, did someone have an outside influence on that? And were the Maesters the ones who did it? But understandably, one of the biggest reasons that the Grand Maester conspiracy became such a well-known and commonly believed theory is that it's directly stated in the text. In the final chapter of A Feast for Crows, Samwell 5, Marwyn the Mage tells Sam this. "Who do you think killed all the dragons the last time around? Gallant dragon slayers armed with swords?" he spat. "The world the Citadel is building has no place in it for sorcery or prophecy or glass candles, much less for dragons." That alone does quite a lot of heavy lifting in favor of the Grand Maester conspiracy being legit. Here we have an Archmaester literally stating that the Maesters of the Citadel destroyed the dragon species. And while I think that Marwyn may be correct that the world the Citadel is building isn't one where magic rules, I also think that assuming he's correct about the Maesters destroying the dragons is a bit too far of a leap to make on this information alone. Marwyn is a character that we are almost entirely unfamiliar with, so whether or not his word can even be relied on is still a question. In addition, if he is trustworthy, why would he instantly tell a stranger something that is such a massive secret? Even more strangely, our initial intro to Marwyn the Mage actually comes in a Game of Thrones, and it makes him sound like a pretty shady individual. In Daenerys 7, Mirri Maz Duur explains, "My mother was God's wife before me and taught me all the songs and spells most pleasing to the Great Shepherd, and how to make the sacred smokes and ointments from leaf and root and berry. When I was younger and more fair, I went in a caravan to Ashai by the Shadow, to learn from their mages. Ships from many lands come to Ashai, so I lingered long to study the healing ways of distant peoples. A moonsinger of the Jogos Nai gifted me with her birthing songs. A woman of your own riding people taught me the magics of grass and corn and horse. And a maester from the Sunset Lands opened a body for me and showed me all the secrets that hide beneath the skin." Ser Jorah Mormont spoke up. "A maester?" "Marwyn, he named himself," the woman replied in the common tongue. "From the sea, beyond the sea. The 7 lands, he said. Sunset Lands. Where men are iron and dragons rule. He taught me this speech." So not only did Marwyn apparently teach Mirri Maz Duur, who eventually becomes the catalyst for the rebirth of dragons, but he has been in Ashai and may have taught Mirri what sounds like some kind of very serious blood magic. He almost certainly knows more than he's letting on, so the fact that he immediately shares this information with Sam makes it even more suspect. But aside from Marwyn's claims, there are other supporting factors that at least hint at the Maesters being involved in some magic-quashing shenanigans as well. Maester Luwin is one of the few who has also earned his Valyrian steel chain link, and when Bran Stark begins showing signs of magical abilities, Maester Luwin seemingly goes out of his way to suppress them. And of course, the biggest tease that has reinvigorated interest into the idea of the Grand Maester conspiracy is House of the Dragon, which is at least opening itself to the possibility that the Maesters are manipulating House Targaryen for their own benefit. Given the obviously close relationship with House Hightower and the Maesters of the Citadel, the particularly friendly relationship between Otto Hightower and the Maesters at court is worthy of suspicion. And, given that Aemma Arryn and her son Balon violently died in the premiere episode, paving the way for Alicent to become Viserys' new wife, it's not hard to see where the more conspiratorially minded viewers might reflexively go. Again, the notion that the Maesters were conspiring to potentially undermine House Targaryen is less a speculation and more a near fact. It's just common sense that a powerful group would be working to undermine an invading force that reduced their power. The only real question is whether or not these efforts actually worked. And the probable answer is yes and no. The Targaryens are not particularly politically skilled as a dynasty, so from a bureaucratic standpoint, the Maesters almost certainly managed to erode or overtake a considerable amount of their power. But when it comes to the dragons, I think that the Maesters may have tried but ultimately failed to crush their species. The presumption that the Maesters had some impact on the extinction of dragons is an understandable one on some level, because when the dragons moved to Westeros, they did go extinct fairly quickly. However, I think the ultimate proof of their failure to end the dragon species lies in Essos and the Valyrian Freehold. As we've seen many times, the magic that exists within Planetos is great and varied. From the Faceless Men of Braavos to the Shadowbinders of Ashai, there seems to be no limit to the mystical power that has been wielded by men. And despite all of that power, the Valyrian Freehold managed to grow into a massive civilization that enslaved thousands and that many simply couldn't muster the forces to fight against. But plenty did fight against them. Braavos was founded by slaves who rebelled against the Valyrians, and the Rhoynar came to Westeros after their struggle to fend off the Valyrians with literal water magic ultimately failed. And these are only a few examples of extremely powerful people who managed to build civilizations of their own, but that couldn't defeat the strength of the Valyrian Freehold. Granted, the Targaryens represented a small and not particularly powerful fragment of this massive empire that collapsed. But Valyrian strength was built on the backs of dragons. So if eliminating them was so easy that the Maesters could have successfully done it in little more than a century, then others would have defeated them in the Valyrian Freehold long before Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya ever made it to Westeros. Whatever the Maesters of the Citadel managed to do that weakened the Targaryen dynasty was almost certainly political rather than magical. House of the Dragon put it pretty forthrightly when it said that the only thing powerful enough to destroy House Targaryen was itself. And that is almost certainly what happened with their dragons. The Maesters undoubtedly had a vested interest in getting rid of dragons, but it's almost certain that they didn't manage to succeed in killing this magical species when so many masters of magic had tried to destroy them and failed. Keeping the dragons alive may have been a fool's errand anyway, but the Targaryens did more to help their enemies than their enemies ever did to harm them, at least when it comes to the indomitable power of dragonfire. But what do you think? Did the Maesters conspire against House Targaryen to kill the dragons? And did they actually succeed? Leave your comments and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.